Okay, Amanda. So, yep, I'll just go ahead and introduce myself. We'll explain what this is going to look like or what I look like, and then I'll hand it off to you, Ty. When you finish doing your introduction, I'll explain the rules for this Zoom meeting, our expectations. So, my name is Amanda Smith. I'm the community specialist for DCSC. It's the Deaf Community Support Center that is here in Minnesota. My pronouns are she, her. And right now I'm white. I have blue-gray eyes, medium brown hair with a ponytail knot in. I have a dark navy blue with logo for KISS, Keystone Interpreting logo. It has green Minnesota as the background and the lettering is blue. I have a watch on with a gold strap. And now, Ty, you can go ahead and introduce and explain what you are wearing. So, my name is William Tai. In my background, I have aqua blue, and I'm wearing a red shirt. I use he, him pronouns, and I am an Asian American. Did I miss anything? Is that good? Amanda, no, that's good. That's all of it. Okay, so now we'll go ahead and explain the rules and expectations for this Zoom webinar. One that is really important, obviously, is keep all comments and opinions respectful. We are trying not to judge too much. This is all about Ty's experience with traveling. And so we are trying to avoid any political topics, any opinions related to vaccines. That is not anything that we are going to be accepting. We need to be respectful of people's opinions and their privacies, so we are going to avoid that. This will be a little bit of a back and forth, but mostly it'll be Ty explaining his experience, and then at the end we will have a Q&A session that you can either add into the chat, and we won't be able to answer all of them. If anything is inappropriate, that is a question that we will be ignoring and not addressing. So I believe that's all of the rules. Again, try and be respectful. If there are any tech issues, if this is freezing or anything, we have Amy. She is here. She'll be able to help. If there are anything on your end, you can always feel free to reach out to Amy and she'll be able to help out. I guess we'll be able to start. What's your daily life looking like before the pandemic started, William? Okay, so back 14 years ago, 12 years ago, 14, I think. Time goes really fast. I was working statistics for the FDA for the past 14 years. And as one of my hobbies is really just traveling. And then how to phrase this? So traveling on a budget is one of the things that I really enjoyed doing. And one of the things is the secrets of that is trying to figure out how to do that. So first I'll explain what my life was like before the pandemic and a little bit now. Every day I would go to work, go to the office, typically 4 times a week, often in person, and that was pretty consistent every day. This is Amanda. So when you started learning and that COVID was happening, it was spreading across the news, people were getting sick. What were your first thoughts? Was it what did you think was going to be happening? What did you notice during that time? I remember back in like 2003, or back, I had heard about the pandemic of SARS in 2003. That was, I mean, 20 years ago now. And that was over in China in 2003, which is kind of funny, 20 years ago, you know. And then 2011, nope, sorry, 20 years ago. 2010, I heard about Ebola in Africa. And I'd gone to Africa, but I was in South Africa, and that was in Western regions. So I was lucky there. And then I kept hearing more about how serious it was, and kept going. And I learned more and more about it. There was more coverage within the news. And then and then it happened. Two things happened. So I was working in the FDA at the time, and then they had COVID, and it hit all of us. So we had a few people who would still go in, and if anybody tested positive, then we would have to take precautions. But that was 4 years ago now that happened, right? 2020. March is when it really started being announced as an emergency within the US. If you tested positive, there were options. You could work from home. That's what I typically did. But if it was a really serious case, our supervisor let us know that all work was just, or once it had started getting serious enough, we decided that everybody had to work for home for the next 8 weeks. And I was like, 8 weeks? Wow. I mean, pretty serious. That's when we really noticed just how impactful it was going to be. Amanda, wow, 8 weeks from home. I mean, how did you feel about that? That's a big change to your schedule. Having to work from home and, you know, during that 8 weeks, you're finding more time for hobbies, finding time to fit things in while you're working from home. I would have to say yes and no. So during that 8 weeks, I would say within that 8 weeks, it fluctuated a lot. I'd already gone international twice, and during that 8 weeks, I was supposed to go to Colombia and then also supposed to go to Europe and a few other places. But the most frustrating thing is that we didn't know what was going to happen during the next 8 weeks. We weren't able to predict what was coming. That was the frustrating part, is not knowing what to expect. So in 8 weeks, there were many people that we didn't see for a while. There were a lot of things we weren't able to do, and it just kept being put off. So there was communication through email, right? Yeah, I'll explain that. It was nice that we didn't have to drive to work. That was really nice. And we always had dinner there. That saved a lot of time. We didn't have to worry about going out to get food. We didn't have to go out as often, just generally. So that saved us a lot of time. But we still had Zoom meetings, so we were still able to interact with our coworkers and our peers, and those were all set up already. But for in person, we didn't see people for quite some time. And then that 8 weeks kept going on a little bit longer, a little bit longer. And for 4 years, I think I only saw my supervisor once since the time everything shut down to now. We've had new coworkers come in, and there are many of them that I still have yet to meet. And also, I have much better Wi Fi now, significantly better than when I was in the office. We are also given better equipment. So there are benefits to that, having like better Wi Fi, better equipment, and everything. But how it really impacted my work. Like I said, there were coworkers and supervisors that I hadn't met, and many interpreters that I would never meet as well. Wow, that seems like a lot of change, William. And for it to still be going on today, that most of your interaction is through Zoom. Um, wow. So during some of your travels, you mentioned two. What happened with those? Did you end up going on those trips or not? So it didn't matter if we wanted to or not. A lot of the flights were canceled for me, so we couldn't have gone. And was that something that was an email to you? Yeah, they emailed me letting us know that everything was canceled, and we'd be really excited like, "Oh, we'll go and do that later." So that's kind of what it ended up being. So how did that work for you? Were you able to reschedule those trips, or did you use your credits for other kinds of vacations later on? What was your plan with that? So first, I'd use my flight credit at first, and then, or for the first trip, I used it, but then I could either use it for the flight credits or I could lose them. So I was trying to think of how I wanted to proceed. So I had 1 year to use it, and also within many of the other countries, they had restrictions. So that was something that I can expand on a little bit later. Do you know how long your trips, all of your plans were held up? When was the restrictions able to be loosened up enough that you were able to finally travel again? Oh wow, yeah. It really depended on where you wanted to go, right? It wasn't just international. Some countries they were really restrictive. They wanted proof of vaccine or that you had a negative test before the flight. There were a lot of things that were required for traveling during that time, but it wasn't just international. Some states, like Alaska and Hawaii, they also had really high restrictions or would fully block people off. New York was really limited. You could go to New York, typically driving, but a lot of hotels wouldn't allow you to stay there. So, I had to get, you have to have a driver's license for that as well. And I remember my last trip before the pandemic, I went to Thailand. That was my last trip. And then Norway as well. I think that one was in the fall. And about the same time, China, they were starting to have COVID hit them. And then Spain as well. I had a trip that was supposed to be there. I was supposed to go to New York. So I had all of these trips that were beforehand, and then COVID really took off in February and March, and that's when I remember everything starting to be canceled. Trippers are going to switch.
This is Amanda. So, in other words, you were looking for trips to take that had less blocking, less things to inhibit you from traveling compared to others. So, some were more open than other places, correct? So William says, well, there was a lot of things blocking travel, that's true, and I had to take advantage of the situations that I could. So, kind of a funny story. Before the pandemic started, I was at 45 different states, but the 45 states was in 2015, nothing after that. So I never really prioritized, touching all 50. And then I had already completed the 45, but then there was Minnesota. So 5 states left. I was thinking, well, I could go ahead and take advantage of finishing those last 5 states. Plus, I was thinking about finally being allowed, the 48 states and having other people come here. So I hadn't touched Maui. I hadn't been to Maui yet. And so I wanted to do that. And also, I was thinking about going to a place that I could stay for a week, like a work cabin or something like that, where I could just stay and enjoy myself while I worked, and maybe on the weekends too. So I thought I did that about 4 times. Yeah. This is Amanda. So, would you mind explaining when you were traveling, how you navigated through all the different flights? And can you kind of tell us a little bit about that? We're kind of excited to hear that part. William says, I think that I would rather say, well, maybe we can save that for later. Okay. So, what did you want to talk about next? Amanda says. William says, I want to talk about traveling during COVID. The most important thing, one of the most important things that I learned is to be adaptation. So make sure that I try to do the best I can in the situation, make the best of it. One time during COVID, okay, so oftentimes when you're flying, they'll have an empty seat. You'll see an empty seat on the plane, and sometimes you'll see the flight has a good deal. But the problem will be the hotel and the airfare will go up. So they're short staffed, and so that sometimes would happen. But and the car rentals too, that got really complicated. During COVID, people couldn't travel, so they didn't know what to do. They would often just sell their vehicles. They couldn't drive them, so even though they could keep them running, but people were ready to start traveling and they didn't have enough vehicles, so they needed more CHIP, like basically not enough. There was a limited supply of vehicles, so the prices went up. So we had to try something different. Turo, it's kind of like Airbnb. It's like private owners of vehicles. So for like one week, it would cost $1,200 for like a week. So that was Turo, Turo, and they would have something for like $600 instead. And sometimes it would be frustrating because you would really want to travel, but then there'd be some museums that required reservations to have limited amount of people that could enter, and restaurants did the same thing. So that became frustrating because you had to make reservations in advance, and they would only allow maybe 25 or 50% occupancy in those places. So that got kind of frustrating. So you really had to plan and prepare well in advance. That got kind of complicated. At that time, I didn't do international because it was required to have a test 1 or 2 days before you were to depart. If it was negative, then you could go. But if it failed and it was positive, then Amanda's saying the test. I want to ask, how did you show proof? Was it like a picture on your phone? It has have to be a PCR test that you could show, and it was also $100 to take that test as well. So you had to show proof of that. And then also you had to have a negative test in order to fly back to the United States. And you had to do one of their local locations that they provided to take a test. So if you were gone a week and you're out and about, you don't know what would happen. So I just kind of played it safe when it came to that. And you'd also buy travel insurance as well, because if you ended up positive, you were stuck there. So, yeah, that really made a big impact on travel, especially if we're talking international travel. Man, uh, I was trying to think of something else I wanted to say about travel during COVID. The United States, it wasn't as bad, but the costs went up a lot. Like I said, car rental, hotels, Airbnbs, it all went up really high. And then there was international too, requiring all those tests that were very expensive. $200 even for a test, and then travel insurance. Yeah, so that really consumed a lot of money. Amanda says, at the airport, did they provide you with like a list of local PCR test places, or did you have to find those places on your own, somewhere that was close by to get the test? Because if you're traveling, especially international, how would you even know where you could take a test like that before you were to fly back home? William says, well, from my understanding, yeah, I'm trying to remember now, but from my understanding with the flights, when you went, you had to go up front and show at the airport, whoever was, responsible for that department, show them your negative test. But if not, they won't, just period, won't let you in, and you have to reschedule for a different flight. But if it's negative, you could proceed. But if it's positive and you were out of the country, I really don't know what you would do. Amanda says, well, maybe you just have to wait till you're negative to fly back home. Yeah, but Amanda says, if you're positive, you just have to stay and hang out. Amanda says, yes, exactly. You stay at a hotel or find someone to pick you up. Yeah. So that's why travel insurance would cover a lot of that with COVID. But I think about all the things that, you could miss out on, so maybe I don't know, you could just stay home too. That might mess up your schedule. Amanda said, yeah, if you're at home, you're staying an extra week, you're not back home, so then what do you do? And William says, yeah, the schedule, your appointments and everything you have going on back home, you're going to miss, and yeah, would get pretty messed up. Amanda says, sure, I'm sure now there's not any more testing requirements, or are there some countries that's maybe a few that are still strict about testing requirements, or I don't know. William says, well, up until then, I think July 2022, up till then, up until that month, some countries didn't require it anymore, the negative or the positive testing. It wasn't required anymore. However, the United States continued with the testing. And that continued until finally July of 2022. I remember that specifically. No more testing, positive or negative. You can come and go. I remember that month specifically. Wow, that's must have been a relief, to not have to add all those requirements to your travel anymore. Yes, exactly. William says. With my traveling, when COVID really started, and it was kind of like post pandemic, when they announced no more tests, those are not required, I right away made a bunch of reservations. And two separate trips I took in less than 1 week. I booked it right away. And I wanted to make double check that there was no testing requirements. I made sure of that first. I did a deep research on that, and then I made the reservations. I wanted to take advantage of that 24-hour cancellation policy, because if you make a reservation and you cancel it in less than 24 hours, there's no charge for that. But if it's after 24 hours, then you have to keep it. So I was checking everything out, and I remember I decided the first trip post pandemic, I wanted to go to Iceland. And I also wanted to go to the Netherlands. And I also wanted to go to Denmark. Because I was feeling like, what is it like to travel internationally? I was forgetting. So when I finally did get that experience again, I realized
I felt like it wasn't enough to double check. I felt like I was forgetting everything, you know? And then I would get there, I would arrive. Luckily, I had packed up enough. So it was nice to have that feeling again. But, there was a lot of things that was out there to help me prepare and get ready for the trips. So some other trips that I had that were new experiences were Turkey, Jakarta, Greenland. Those were some that I really, really enjoyed. And I think post pandemic, in 2 years, I've hit 15 countries. But wow, yeah, that is so before and post pandemic, if you calculate all of them together, how many have you had? So William's saying, I've had 55 so far. In the 15 recent, there are some countries that I've already been to that I went to again within the last 2 years. So that is calculated within the 55. Of all of or before the US had announced the pandemic or announced that they didn't need any more testing, I did hit all 50 states. Michigan was my final state that I had to go to. Michigan? Interesting. That's a funny one. William saying, yeah, I had touched down in Michigan before, but I had never been around. Amanda saying, well, you've never done like a night in Michigan? William saying, yeah, I've done layovers there, but it was nice to actually be able to drive around, get some coffee, go to a museum. I did go to the Rosa Parks Museum, and that being able to see that was really cool. I went to a baseball game as well. Amanda, cool. So you've traveled, you've made videos, you've posted that. Where has that been? So typically, most of my posts have been related to international stuff. There's not a ton that has been local. 2 years after the pandemic, there's not a ton of domestic content that I've been posting. But now that I'm traveling again, I can really start getting things going. I had some old YouTube videos from the past that I was watching recently. And Amanda saying, do you just post on Facebook, YouTube? Where are you typically posting your content now? Most of my content is on Facebook. You can follow me on Facebook, and I do plan on having my own portfolio going forward of when, what, and kind of giving my whole experience. But I want to try and do something a little bit different. Yeah, that's great. Maybe if you have any like traveling advice that you could share with us in the post-pandemic world, like what tips do you have for what to expect when you are traveling? So William saying, for tips, if you are flying, make sure you know the rules. Generally in America, the rules are pretty standard. Once you reserve a flight, it doesn't matter domestic or international, but if you're flying into the US, you have 24 hours typically to cancel, and you'll be able to get a full refund back if it's within a 24-hour limit. And that 24-hour gives you time. Oh, maybe this was the wrong date that I reserved it for. Or you reserve it and then you realize for whatever reason it isn't going to work. After the pandemic, that 24-hour credit or refund really came into play. The fees have really changed for flights and also just for cancellations. Before, there used to be a lot of cancellation fees, but now there are no more. And that is something that I take advantage of pretty frequently. Often I'm flying, it's maybe $250, and then I'll see that it's down to $160. So that's something that I might just rebook and get that extra $70 to $90 back, or they might refund it in a form of a credit. Also, with points, booking with points is really nice. But if you see the price go down later, you can rebook again and get some of those points back. So make sure that you're aware of the rules that are around flights right now. But that doesn't always apply to international travel. They have their own rules in other countries that the US doesn't have. I think the US is typically more flexible. Amanda's saying, oh, that's interesting. I didn't know that. Yep. Yeah, I think that's something many people don't typically know. For better or for worse, the pandemic did change some rules. It is a little bit complicated within it, but after the pandemic, there's a lot of things that are out of our control. So within Ukraine and Russia right now, there's all of that that's going on, and then the relationship with America. So America and China seem to have some political tension right now. and that is what it is. Russia and Ukraine have their complex situation that's going on as well. And all of these kind of layer up on top of each other. The US and China both have China doesn't want so the US and China have given up a lot of rights to fly into each other's countries. Um, so there's a lot of lobbying that goes along to block that off from setting up different flights, and a lot of them are being held and postponed. So I think China is a good example of how things have changed after the pandemic. Before the pandemic, flights between China and the US, a lot of times they would have flights that are like $150. And post pandemic, or before they had like about 150 flights, and now it's really reduced to about 20 flights. So it's become much more restrictive. China isn't trying to get a ton of US flights into their country right now. And it really is a weird policy. So it was 15, now it's about 50. And then on the other hand, within the war with Ukraine and Russia, there is a lot of restrictions. You cannot fly over Russia right now. China will typically fly over Russia, and they can. That is okay. They can fly over Russia to come to the US, but if you are flying from the US, you cannot fly over Russia to China. And that really does affect the price. Everything flying into Asia has become really expensive. Before it was typically under $1,000, but now it's closer to $2,000 if you're flying to Asia. So that's one of the things that we're seeing is a lot of prices did go down, but that's one that has gotten more expensive. So there's a lot of things for better or for worse that the pandemic has impacted travel. I mean, I'm saying, yeah, a lot of that I didn't know about. William saying, yeah, there's a lot of that that I had to figure out and catch up on what other countries, what they're doing after the pandemic. Amanda saying, "Is how often are you checking in on that kind of stuff? Every few weeks?" William saying, "Oh, every day. I want to know what's happening with flights. I want to know what's going on with new credit cards right away. New credit card. There was one new credit card that was recently announced, and so I wanted to be able to see what kind of benefits there were. I wasn't a big fan of it, so I think I'm going to hold off on that." And Amanda's saying, if you're looking for a new credit card that has better benefits for travel, typically that's the reason that you're looking for them, right? Yep, and some of them have airline partnerships as well. So William, you said airports, which airlines are the best for traveling? Which airlines do you feel you like the best? What I can tell you right now, I mean, I want to go to Europe, so I'll use KLM. That's typically what I'll use. That's what I use typically after the pandemic. And that matches best with my travel goals. Air France is okay as well. Amanda's saying, during the pandemic, did you notice that there was any restriction on the seats? No, no, there wasn't. There wasn't really any restrictions on it. They used to have masks that were required in it, but then that stopped probably about the end of 2021, start of 2022, somewhere in that time. Man, saying, oh, that's, I mean, such a big change from back then to now. William, once again, for better or for worse. So Amanda's saying, we have a lot of people. I want to make sure that we're able to give some time for questions. William's saying there's a lot of things that I think I started talking about and then I didn't quite get to the end of it. So, it'll be nice to get be able to wrap up on some of those and clarify some of your questions. Amanda's saying, yeah, we got a lot of questions here. I'm ready. Bring them on. So, what inspires you to travel? What is your passion in relating to that? William saying, so how did I start traveling? I would say it started with my parents. My first international trip I can remember to Star
Taiwan.
what? Or
Taiwan.
to Taiwan. Thank you. So I think I was 5, and that was my first international trip. I traveled to some other countries, and but really it did start with my parents. I think that's where I got it from. I got it from them. But it is a bit odd. I also have a deaf brother, and he does not like to travel. So, quite a difference between us. Amanda saying, yeah, quite the opposites there. Yeah, you could say that. But it's odd. Funny, but the last time, I think it was 7 or 8 years ago, our family had finally gotten together. All 4 of us went to Taiwan, but my mother was there early. And my father had given me all of the flight information, so both my parents were there. My brother had joined in with my brother, and they'd given my flight, and I said, yeah, I'll meet you there. And I wanted to be able to use my traveling points, so I was able to use like business class to be able to fly there. I went from New York. Oh, that's nice. Yeah, I had gone from New York out to Taiwan. So I went to see my brother, and the first question he asked me was, how did you sleep? How was the flight? I showed him the picture, and I showed him this bed that I had in it, and he was so jealous. And I said, I travel more often. I have these tricks. Oh, that's funny. Yeah, you definitely travel more often. Interpreter switch. Yeah.
So I think you already answered the question about the different countries you've been to. You said 55. You said yes, now it's at 55 right now. And then the other question, what some countries you've been to twice, so you already answered that question. And same question there. Could you clarify again about the 24-hour cancellation policy? How that applies for the United States and for international? Does it apply for both? William says, okay, sure, I can do that. Everything with the US domestic, all the cities, is a 24-hour. If it's another country, like for Spain or a different country, their policy I'm not familiar with. But if you're going to use American Airlines and use miles, or, well, no, that doesn't really apply, I guess. American miles, that's for other flights for other countries, no. You can cancel anytime because, like I said, American Airlines, there's no fees, no charge. charge for changing or canceling. Before the pandemic, yeah, I do have to think $150, I believe, was the fee before the pandemic, $150. But now that doesn't apply anymore. So 24 hours for anything in the United States, domestic, flying, departing, arrival, either way, it's 24 hours as long as it's within the US. Sometimes you can make a reservation and you'll see a little line that says you have until tomorrow night, 11:59 Eastern Standard Time to cancel. So just look for that. Amanda, thank you for clarifying. Then there was someone that asked, why did you choose to visit certain countries more than other countries? William says, yeah, that kind of depended. Obviously, one of the top reasons would be family, right? Taiwan. I was there, I think, like 6 times, but other countries I went to more. It just kind of depended. Some of them I would go, but it would feel like unfinished business. For example, the first time when I to Anne Frank's house, the second time, um, I flew to find something available and they required me to stay overnight. So I was like, that's fine. I'll do that. So some of them, it really just depended on, it might have just been a requirement to the travel. And some of it was just kind of felt like it was unfinished business. But when I went to Iceland 4 times, um, there was just so much. Even the Netherlands, 3 times. I just, some things just felt like I haven't seen it all. And other places I felt satisfied. I would go and felt like Japan, obviously, I was not satisfied with everything, feeling like I saw everything there. So I guess it just depended on how satisfied I felt with seeing everything, if I felt like I want to see more or not. Sometimes it also depended on what's available and where and when the best deals were, or if there were points that I needed to take advantage of, then I would just kind of make the reservation and get excited about it. So Amanda said that makes total sense. The next question we have here is regarding your flight. What is your most preferred airlines? William says, oh, um, Lifetime, I think Delta is probably the most, but after the pandemic, I noticed I seem to really frequent, like for international, KLM. That seems to be, I'm starting to really use them more often. And I'm going to be flying KLM again in the fall. Amanda said, I'm just curious, where are you going in the fall? William says, well, from Scandinavia and also some Baltic countries, Lithuania, Estonia. I found out that the American people don't go there, so I said, I'll go there. It's something different. Amanda said, wow, that's really exciting. Lots of exciting plans. Okay, the next question asks you, in regards to international, enchanted license or passport?
Enhanced.
Thank you. Enhanced license or passport. The passport has a different design now, but my passport that I got was 2015, so it looks like a regular one to me. But my best friend, showed me their passport, and it looked totally different than mine. You know, very, very different, real tough. So I have to renew mine soon. I believe next year it expires in 2025. So probably I would say not the enhanced. I haven't done that yet, but compared to today, I have to renew my passport, so I'm just going to do that. Amanda says, very interesting. The next question is, what is your favorite country that you've traveled to so far? Your number one favorite. William says, okay, well, that is the most common question that travelers get. I think there's a few because it depends on if you're asking about culture or food. So this is one of the hardest questions to answer. I'll do the best I can. Ecuador, I went there, the Galapagos Islands, and that might be my most favorite. There's a lot of different animals that you would never see in America. So you can only find them there. They're wild and it's almost
It's almost like Disney World.
Disney World. But you see them running around free, and there's sea lions. There's things just regular animals just walking along on the street. It's strange to just see wild animals all around you. Um, Also, Antarctica. I think that's one of my favorites as well. If you look for my YouTube videos, Death Antarctica, you'll be able to find it. Europe, also Iceland, Norway, Japan. Yeah, I don't know. Amanda says, thank you for sharing. I think we have one more question before, or maybe two more if we have time before we wrap up. William says we have 7 minutes left. Does work allow you to travel? Are they flexible with your schedule and how many hours you work per week? William says, well, they're flexible. What's important is that I have enough hours to get what I need done. So that's all. As long as I let my supervisor know, 2 months, 3 months in advance. I don't travel during the summer typically because there's two reasons. The costs go up. It's very expensive. A lot of people are traveling in the summer. And the other reason is that a lot of my coworkers like to use summer vacation. So I allow them to travel during that time and I take care of business and stick around. And also, I save up my hours and we're allowed to do 240 hours per year for vacation. And then we can roll it over to the next year. So I don't usually build up to 240 hours though. Amanda says, okay, then we have another question. Would you consider yourself a minimalist traveler? William says, I can do anything. I can bring everything. Minimalist, nah, that might be different. I budget. I don't know. Yeah, anything you said. Okay. Amanda said the last question says, what are your travel plans for 2025? Do you have any plans? William says 2025. Well, what's in my mind right now? Yes, I want to visit Taiwan again and Belize and no, yeah, Morocco. Yeah, Morocco. Amanda said, that sounds cool. So you got a few, three or four different plans for 2025. William says, I'm not exactly sure yet. I don't have the reservations confirmed, but maybe soon. Now I'm going to be excited to make those reservations. right now, flying to Japan, well, anywhere in that area, the tickets, they're available for points and miles. It's very competitive and very expensive right now. So Amanda says, I understand. That makes sense. So you have to do a lot of research, in other words, looking for all those tips and making sure you get the best option. That's a lot of work, a lot of preparation. William says, yeah, I saw a question in the chat. I'm happy to answer those. Okay, I'm going to open the chat now and see. The question I see Aiden had, why do I like to go to different countries? Maybe because of food? Um, Aiden, I forgot your sign name. Aiden, yeah. Yes, you're right. A lot of variety of food, but there's also culture and history and being out in the nature, all of those things. So I hope that you someday can go and realize why I like to travel so much. Yes, Amanda says I'd love to experience that as well. Michelle asked me how often I bump into someone else who is deaf, or how often I run into people who are deaf. Okay, well, at the airport, mm, someone deaf, not very often, like almost never, I don't think. No. Um, but a deaf guide, I have to think about that. Very, very few, I would say. Very few. Not very often. Sometimes I'll contact them, reach out to them, and I won't get a reply. But sometimes I'll have friends, or typically most of my guides are in Asia, like Japan, Thailand, and Singapore. I have friends there, and sometimes I can sleep overnight and stay with them, and then they can kind of guide me around. How often am I out? It kind of depends on where I'm going. Like if I go to some different country, probably not often, but Slavard, that island, it's in the far north. I did bump into some people who were deaf there, but Norway, I could do some kind of gesturing and sign language with them, but I found out that they had the next question was about getting COVID. I never tested positive. Every time I thought I was sick, I would test and it would be negative. So, but if it was like 1 or 2 weeks before I would fly, I had to be very, very careful, of course. I did not want to get sick, so I always wore a mask as my flights were approaching. I was very careful. But I never ended up testing positive. That's the truth. Amanda, well, that's a great answer. So, okay, the deaf, the deaf guide, yes, in Brazil, yes, that is true. Okay, Amanda saying time has run out. If you are having more questions about travel, you can always contact Ty or follow his Facebook. You can learn more about him from his posts. And I hope that he sets up a platform and you all can visit it very soon. It's very exciting. William says, yes, I will let you know more about that travel hacking for sure. And Joel, Barish, and Calvin, um, definite.
Deaf Media Travel.
Thank you. There's lots of them that they all. You can look at the Chase card too. There's so many tips that can help you with travel, but you know I I'm mostly focus on what we talked about today, but that's something that I didn't think of really during COVID until after COVID, but it takes some time and I'm going to work on that platform and get it all organized and put it together. I'm hoping to do 20 different vlogs. So don't pay ATM fees because there's international fees plus USA fees with the ATM. So don't do the ATM fees. Don't do that. Oh, that's a good tip. That's a good tip. Okay, well, thank you so much, Ty, for your time and your stories and sharing your experience. Thank you so much. We appreciate having both interpreters tonight as well. We appreciate everyone who came and joined. Ty says, thank you for coming. Thank you to the interpreters. I appreciate everyone who came. And thank you for showing up and being here. Whatever questions that you do have, please there's Kyle asked a question about language barriers. No, I didn't really feel that way. There were some people that did not speak English, but there's an app that translates things right away, immediately into English or whatever. There was a Japanese woman that didn't know English, so it translated it to English. So in Vietnam, same thing. The taxi driver, they didn't know English, so we just used the app and I made sure that it translated the money correctly too. But yeah, anyways, thank you. All right. Thank you. Amanda says, thank everybody so much again. Have a wonderful night. Thank you, everybody.